Yes, please. She's a free journalist, but has traveled around and followed the Syrian area for years now, and I think has a very, very unique experience, at least from in Finnish context, on these issues that we just heard Gareth opening us. One comment to Gareth only from my side now. I mean, in Finnish debate, we are following how the refugees are young, healthy male coming to Finland, but you just opened up the situation in Turkey in such a way that we now know where are the women and children and their ability to move on. But let's start with the comments from Sana, and then we open this debate for the whole audience, please.
Okay, thank you very much to the speakers, and thank you very much to Kalevi Sorsa Foundation. I will speak in English. So as Mika was saying, I have followed the Syrian civil war and its impact on the neighboring countries for quite some time. And I have spent time in Turkey, particularly around in the border areas. But the Turkish situation was really covered very well by Gareth already. I don't have much to add to that. So maybe I thought it would be useful if I spoke a bit about how the situation has developed and how we have arrived to what we see today, and how, I mean, now the crisis also, we are witnessing it here in Europe also. So I thought it would be useful if I went back in time to late 2013. I was in Lebanon at the time. This was late 2013. And the population of Lebanon at the time was about 4.5 million. This is the Lebanese people, and including the Palestinian refugees. And the size of the country is about 10,230 square kilometers, which is about 3% of the Finnish territory. According to my calculation, I hope I got it correct. And the number of Syrian refugees at the time in Lebanon was over 1 million. So Lebanon was already a very unstable country before the arrival of the Syrian refugees. There was a civil war which ended officially in 1991, but arguably it hasn't really finished at all since then. The infrastructure was stretched to its limits. Everyone who has been living in Lebanon knows that there are daily electricity cuts. In some parts there's electricity perhaps 3 hours per day. And there are also daily water cuts already before the arrival of the Syrian refugees. Lebanon is also home to about 300,000 Palestinian refugees, the majority of which are living in poverty, and they don't have any hope of being granted the Lebanese citizenship. And the political system in Lebanon is based on proportional representation of the different religious groups. So this is also a challenge because almost all the Syrian refugees that are coming are Sunni Muslims. So in practice, they will have no hope of getting the Lebanese citizenship. So for this reason, Lebanon has done its best not to encourage Syrians to stay. There were never any official camps established in Lebanon, unlike in Turkey. And I have visited the camps in Turkey, and they are quite decent, whereas in Lebanon they are all unofficial and quite horrible. And by this time, by the autumn of 2013, the refugee crisis had cost Lebanon an estimated of $7 billion. The UNHCR, the UN refugee organization, was providing the refugees that had been registered with some help, but it was underfunded. Throughout the years, they have protested this, that they don't have enough funds. I think the last time they were forced to cut the food aid to Syrian refugees in Lebanon and Jordan was in the summer. And the situation in Syria at the time, the death toll was 126,000, and the number of refugees was over 2 million at the time. So this was late 2013. This was before ISIS even joined the fighting. So at the time, I remember writing some articles about the situation, but it really seemed like it didn't really concern Europe at the time because it was outside. It was not affecting Europe. So I think this was. It's useful to remember this, that the situation has been developing for a long time at the region, and Europe only seems to have woken up when the refugees started arriving to Europe. And I think the number that has arrived now is 750,000. Okay, so that, according to my calculations, again, is about 0.1% of European population. Whereas in Lebanon, for example, the number is, as presented by Gareth, is 1/5 of the people in Lebanon are Syrian refugees now. If we're talking about Finland, I think the number we are expecting to possibly arrive by the end of this year is 35,000. And again, according to my calculation, that's 0.6% of our population. So I hope that demonstrates the severity of the situation in the region. And this is quite normal, that when there is an armed conflict, usually the people run to, almost in all the cases, they go to the neighboring countries, which are much poorer, much less equipped to deal with this kind of refugee flows, arguably, than the rather wealthy European countries. So then I've been following the debates here in Finland about the refugee crisis, and sometimes tried actively to avoid the debates that we've had. So I see a lot of people, especially in Finland, are questioning how is this our problem? Why are we forced to deal with the problem? The wars are happening in the Middle East. Now we see refugees arriving in Finland. How is this a European problem? So I would argue that there's a moral case that this is a European problem. A number of European countries have a long history in the Middle East. Countries such as France and all the great powers of Europe have a long history in the Middle East, and it hasn't always had only a positive impact on the region. Also, I think you can ask, why should it be a Turkish problem, or why should it be a Lebanese problem? As I've tried to explain, and Gareth has demonstrated it well, these countries are not very well equipped, actually not equipped at all to be dealing with this kind of flows of refugees. So just because they happen to be next to, because of their location, shouldn't Europe show more solidarity to these countries? I think it's also a European problem because there are an estimated 3,000 European jihadists have traveled to Syria and Iraq, and many of them have been become very important and prolific members of ISIS, for example, and they are really worsening the crisis in those countries also. And these people almost all of them have grown up in Europe. So I think that makes it a European problem also. And also, I think if you consider the amount of arms that European countries are selling to the Middle East, for example, France, 38% of French arms exports went to the Middle East. And the Middle East is the most important region for the French arms industry. Last June, for example, Saudi Arabia signed a deal with France. They bought $12 billion worth of arms from France. Germany has recently, in the first half of this year, Germany has exported arms, has sold arms, ammunition, and military vehicles and ships to Iraq, Kuwait, Jordan, Lebanon, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia. So this is a bit controversial, considering, for example, Saudi Arabia, which is a supporter and is very actively actually exporting the Wahhabi ideology, which is not that different from the ideology of ISIS. And also Saudi Arabia is estimated to be beheading twice as many people as ISIS. So I think that was the moral case, but then I think it's also in the European interest to deal with this situation. One of the reasons is our geographical proximity to the Middle East. Unlike the USA, which has hardly accepted any refugees at all, now the Obama administration has suggested that they should take about up to 10,000 refugees from Syria, and this has already been, there has been a lot of opposition to this idea. But the US has an ocean between the Middle East, which Europe doesn't have. So, for example, Turkey shares a border with the EU. The distance between Tunisia and the Italian island of Lampedusa apparently is about 100 kilometers. And from Turkey to go to the Greek islands is just a few kilometers. So we can't really expect the problems to stay in the Middle East. And I think even more importantly, the recent attacks in Europe prove even more that this kind of conflicts cannot be contained anymore, because traveling these days is so easy and it's relatively cheap. And also because of the internet. I heard somewhere that possibly the attack in Paris was organized from Syria. I'm not sure if that was the case, but it's possible. Everyone knows that a lot of the jihadists are recruited from Syria via the internet. So, as for the European response to this crisis, I mean, I think obviously, I don't think you can just deal with the number of refugees. For example, in the case of Syria, in the case of Syria, half the country, half the population is already displaced. So I think if this goes on, then the whole country will be displaced. So the first response should be to really end the conflict. But I mean, in recent times, for example, France reacted to the events in Paris by bombing ISIS, joining the US and the other allies to be bombing ISIS. Now they are bombing in coordination with Russia, which is allied with the Syrian regime, who is responsible for the largest numbers of refugee flows. It's not ISIS, it's the Syrian regime. And it's bombing campaigns that people are running away from. So that didn't make a lot of sense to me. And the other reason why it doesn't make a lot of sense is that the US, of course, has been bombarding ISIS for more than a year now, and there hasn't been any progress. I think all the experts argue or agree that you cannot finish this organization with airstrikes alone. And already the US bombings have also already, it is estimated that they have also killed hundreds of civilians in Syria. So it doesn't seem like a very effective response. And as for the deal with Turkey, as Gareth was really, I mean, I don't have anything to add except that what I also see being the problem is that it's not. I mean, the whole aim is just to seal the European borders. From my discussions with Syrian refugees in Turkey, is that they are leaving because, not necessarily because they are starving, although there are people starving, but those people wouldn't afford to go anyway. But the people are leaving, a lot of them are from the former middle classes who have exhausted their savings. I think there was recently a report that it's about 500,000 Syrian children who are out of school. So it's almost impossible to find any kind of decent work in Turkey. So the reason why they're leaving is because they say there is no future in Turkey. And I don't see this European response tackling this. It seems to be only, the idea seems to be just to make them stay in Turkey. And
shall we proceed to this?
Yeah. Actually, I just came to the conclusion. Thank you.